Welcome to the AirCon Vault. Here, you can find the recordings of the live streams from Airwiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors, as sound effects, Aftertouch Audio, Boom Library, Fmod, Game Audio Learning, Game SoundCon, Kilohertz, Rev Rooms, Soundcuts, Strata from Audio Kinetic, and Airwiggle, the online home for audio people. We hope you enjoy the video.
All right, everyone, thanks for coming in. My name is Sabrina Fedele, and I'm going to walk you through how to tackle the last 20% of the game's audio. I won't be checking the chat too much throughout the talk again, but would be happy to answer any questions afterwards. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a sound designer based in Seattle with a BA in psychology. I'm also an admin for the IGDA Climate SIG, Seattle Game Audio, and the Game Audio Community Organizing Nexus. This is because I care about strengthening communities and making a positive environmental impact. I'll be using my background in psychology, my network, and my experience as audio director of the Wandering Bands Airborne Empire to inform this talk. So, when I moved from Denver to Seattle, I had a small break from working on all the sound design and audio implementation for this open world city builder RPG that's set in the sky. Here's a bit of our trailer so you can get a sense of what the game is like.
Until you came along. To show our people that we can be strong and free, taking to the skies. Will you be the inheritor foretold to decide the fate of the airborne empire?
All right, so I got burnt out after working long hours for a full year, moving cross country, and getting COVID immediately after. This meant I still had to design and implement over 100 sounds for the game, in addition to fixing pesky bugs, revising previous sounds, improving our audio system, and polishing our mix. I started to wonder if other sound designers felt overwhelmed and overloaded at the end of projects, or if it was just me. Turns out the way I've been feeling at the end of development is quite common. The last stages can feel like a free fall because 1, it exposes everything that wasn't working or efficient earlier in development. 2, it sometimes requires entirely new strategies or techniques. 3, a backlog is almost inevitable since we're relying on work coming in from other departments. And 4, endings of games and stories make lasting impressions on players. This is why we can think of the last 20% of game development in terms of the Pareto principle, where 20% of our efforts can lead to 80% of the results. This takes us to first 3 challenges that I'll pose to you today. How do we determine why the last stage of game development is so difficult for us and so significant? When we're in a negative enough headspace, very little can get done well. We're also not receptive to solutions when we shut down, even when they're right in front of us. This is why we're starting with the psychological reasons. On Airborne Empire, I got burnt out. Not from working on the game necessarily, but from several big life events that happened in the time I'd been contracted. This, coupled with the team feeling like the audio was almost done a year in advance, even though I still had to make over half our sounds, felt pretty discouraging. Sudden changes in your personal life, poor work conditions, managing tight deadlines, audio feeling like an afterthought by other members of the team, and work not giving you purpose can all contribute to burnout. I relate it to what David Lynch calls the suffocating rubber clown suit of negativity, since we can debilitate ourselves with our own thoughts. Placeholder sounds can be deadly for our confidence in the game itself too. While our leads may approve of them as interim assets, knowing we can do much better without trying is a big blow to self-efficacy. Incidentally, I did this for some city sounds that you heard in that trailer. Once we landed upon ones that were decent, other sounds took priority and I moved away from them too soon. This raised a couple issues. There was no guarantee I'd have time to work on them later. It made me more likely to cut this corner elsewhere, and I felt like a fraud for not knowing how to make a good ambience in a day. That's where imposter syndrome kicked in. Imposter syndrome also feeds avoidance and zips up that suffocating rubber clown suit of negativity. Sometimes it stops us from fighting for the sounds or systems that the game needs most. Other times it makes us question if we can do our jobs. Thinking this thought doesn't make it fact works sometimes, but we need to back it up with evidence. This makes it harder when we lose our good habits. The end of game development could mean we're working with different schedules than before. Maybe there are more meetings, you're on hiatus while a final biome is being made, or that backlog demands more hours. We suffer when this breaks our good habits because we're less efficient and may be thrown off without our former routine. This makes the technical reasons harder to manage. Some of these will happen on every project, and others could be mitigated or prevented altogether. Sometimes you'll have different opinions about what should take priority than your team. Other times, certain animations, systems, or features get pushed out that you have to wait on. You could have too much in your backlog, not enough time to craft certain sounds, and deal with some sounds getting cut. This is all while new sounds or possible parameters get added that weren't anticipated. For example, our weather system announcement after early access was a complete surprise. I started doing mockups for this as soon as it became a priority and temporarily dropped my other tasks. Debbie Gonzalez, the head of SoundLab at Keyword Studio, asked her team of sound designers what they thought about all this. They recently did the sound design and audio implementation for Batman Arkham Shadow. Part of what they said makes the final haul so challenging are time constraints. Their timelines are based on what they plan for throughout development, but add-ons and changes they don't anticipate can disrupt their schedules. When this is because other teams are behind, it puts them behind because they have to wait in tow. Finally, their team said that bad QA ticket filtering, redundancies, ill-defined priority levels, and QA not working with the updated build can add to what she so aptly puts as chaos. At this stage, there may be sounds, aspects of your audio system, and the mix that are still not working too. Some may be overt, but others may be revealed by QA or playtesters. If they're not logged well and prioritized, they'll get lost or forgotten until they pop up when you're mixing. Ideally, we pre-mix throughout development, but sometimes this doesn't happen. Other times we follow our mixing plan, but are still running into trouble. For example, despite putting in the mixing groundwork, I ran into masking issues in combat that we'll talk about later. Often we just have less communication with other departments than we need, or there's misunderstandings. Even when our team has the best intentions, it's hard to get timely updates on new features, changes, and what got slashed. To get the perspective of someone else I admire in AAA, I asked Rayson Varner why he thought the end of game development was crucial. He was the audio director of Borderlands 3 and Avowed, and is currently a senior sound designer at Vicious Sound. He said that while the end is almost always vital, it's also rooted in what he calls predictable dysfunction. This predictable dysfunction is from the volatility of development. It can prevent us from executing the decisions we've known we've had to make for some time due to upstream dependencies, people deferring the decision-making power to other team members, and other factors outside of our control. Between this disruption and predictability 2/3 through the project and scope finally stopping, it throws our original schedule way off and forces us to scramble to tie up loose ends. This takes us to our next challenge. What mindset and strategies can we adopt to stay on track and improve our performance? A constructive mindset is going to be necessary to employ any of these strategies successfully, so once again, we'll start with the psychology. It's important to ask for help when we're stuck on specific issues that we're unlikely to be able to solve alone. When enough time passed wrestling with certain bugs in Airborne Empire, I asked a peer for help. He established which bugs to ignore and how to address the ones I should eliminate, so I was finally able to tackle them. When we're open-minded, we can learn more, be curious about more, and our minds can be changed. A new strategy that solves our problems could be around the corner, but we won't discover it if we're stuck in our old ways. One of the best mental things we can do in the last stage of game development is be receptive to new ways of working or approaching our job. It's possible that what was working for us before just won't do it during this final push, but we'll keep trying the old way anyway. For example, I used to submit every sound I created directly to the co-founders of the Wandering Band. Any sound design and implementation changes were submitted for review unless they were very minor. To make it easier for them to evaluate me, I made weekly reviews in Slack that highlighted everything I did and everything I would do the following week. But after early access, there was no longer a rush on the audio. They started to trust me. They were happy with what they had, so a lot of the structure we had was gone. We no longer had the weekly reviews. We no longer had the check-ins. So basically, the way I was working before was no longer an option. I didn't realize that I had to refactor the way I worked for a long time, thinking, what's wrong with me? Why has this gotten so much harder? So I decided to do a couple things differently. I started simulating the accountability and predictability of my old ways within a new way of working. I cleaned up my asset spreadsheet, reevaluated priorities, and made a post-early access section on that asset list. Then I revisited my audio pillars and mixing pillars to make sure I was still following them. After that, I added my priorities for this week and the following week to Notion, while mainly leaving bugs and big-ticket items for Jira. Finally, I organized my folders so that it would be easy to open all relevant pages each morning. This kept my weeks more focused and structured, especially because we never had a producer to help with this. Changing the way I worked was inextricably linked to communication, so we're going to start off our strategy section with that. We've established that communication will be less frequent than is ideal, so we need to push for having interdepartmental meetings and more meetings with our leads. On Airborne Empire, we went down from meeting weekly to monthly, but I made sure we checked in at least weekly, and then I had the option to join our interdepartmental meetings. Our composer, Paul Aubrey, only really joined the meetings if he had new music for me to implement. One time he joined to ask about adding certain music late, but got shut down by our systems programmer since we were handling instantiating music events in code, and that programmer was already swamped. If you need to discuss a new element with your team this late, make sure it's vital to the game. Senior sound designer Aaron Brown suggests that sounds or features that serve the core loop take priority, whereas the little details may not be worth it. One set of sounds I knew the game couldn't go without were changes to notifications based on your city's morale level. Morale determines whether your workers will leave, so keeping them happy and being reminded of their morale level affects gameplay a lot. This really fit our bird-centric audio pillar, since chirps are at the heart of these sounds. Our game director said he actually thought I was nuts when I suggested this feature, but once it was in game, he thought it made Airborne Empire much better. Here's a quick example of it.
Time notification. The owl call and lethargy in which the drum is played changes depending on the morale level. Our final example will be the daytime notification. We kept the coupling of drums and bird calls so it was similar to the nighttime notification, except we added an Easter egg to this one based on our team's request. Bird sounds also alert the player.
All right. So what about the rest of the sounds in our backlog that we need to make and the systems we need to add? Depending on your team's preferences, make sure you track what you have left in Jira, a note-taking app, or just within a spreadsheet that you've been updating. I suggest organizing the remaining sounds in a way that matches your folder structure throughout. If you haven't made consistent naming conventions for DAW projects, sound files, and their folders, agree on one with the team so everyone can find what they're looking for easily. One of our late game features, due to it being pushed out to after early access, was our gameplay speed snapshots. Airborne Empire has 3 different gameplay speeds, and I only learned from early access that players tended to almost exclusively play at 3 times speed. At that time, our sounds were sped up automatically in code, which meant plenty of them got cut off. Other critical alerts or tonal sounds just seemed off-putting at higher speeds. In hindsight, I should have caught this earlier since variable gameplay speed is a staple of the city building genre. So I excluded alerts and quest buses from my changes and made 2 new snapshots for 2 times and 3 times speed. 2 times speed was pitched up 2 semitones, and the volume of all sound effects was brought down by 4 decibels. At 3 times speed, I pitched up 4 semitones while all sound effects were brought down by 5.5 decibels. Why did I bring the volume down at all? According to Kevin Regami of Power Up Audio, when players speed up the game, they don't care as much about the sound. Here's an example of those snapshots in game. I hope the suspense is killing. Oh, there we go. So just because I knew what I wanted to do doesn't mean we could implement it immediately. Because I waited late game to figure this out, it actually took 3 more months to get it in game. This is why it's really important to scope thoroughly and make sure we get to things early, because it'll take a lot longer and players might notice if we wait too long. For the bugs still bugging you, work closely with your QA team, your systems programmer, or audio programmer to find their root causes. Some don't need to be eliminated, such as the fmod loading delay exceeded bug in certain circumstances, and some just need to be tackled by a different department. I had to be careful to log bugs in Jira with as much detail and consistency as possible, and playtest after pulling latest regularly. So I went back to my notes on Amanda Lavin's talk about audio QA at GDC and followed them as closely as possible. I also had to educate myself on the parts of fmod I didn't know to figure out how to solve the bugs I didn't notice earlier. No matter what game you're on, creating a satisfying mix is something you need to do throughout development and especially at the end. Having guideposts for what you want to prioritize and mix, figuring out buses as early as possible, and setting exporting standards are all great ways to get ahead of many issues. Even though I did this, I still had problems with masking, but eventually solved it with this. If this doesn't end up loading, I have this audio implementation breakdown available online. So we'll just give it a couple seconds and see.
It was more important for the player to know that their city got damaged or that they successfully hit their enemy and that an attack was coming. This is because dodging isn't an option in this game, so hearing an attack isn't as crucial as reviving your city or knowing an enemy was neutralized. This is why there's a side chain on a special impacts bus that affects the compressor on the attacks bus. To reflect what level of...
All right. While solutions are great, preventative measures are even better. So how do we prevent ourselves from getting overloaded at the end? Let's cover how to prevent burnout, stay motivated, and get in a headspace conducive to doing our best work. While this is a luxury for some, I suggest setting boundaries for when we check our messages for work, when we discuss work, and when we can be accessed. I've taken Slack off my phone recently so that I can't check work messages for this very reason. You can also put buffer times in your schedule for how long it will take to make and implement sounds. This accounts for if things go wrong or get changed, making it less likely you'll have to crunch. If you haven't heard of flow, it's the psychological experience of doing something for its own sake and getting lost in it. If we don't do this at work, we need to find another way to do this. It can stave off a lot of symptoms of burnout and make you more resilient in general. I used to achieve flow when I did sound design for its own sake, but honestly, this stopped happening when I started making money from it. It went from feeling like play to feeling like work until I started recording for its own sake again in my off time, such as recording products. Hobbies outside work can also feel like play and stoke your creativity by fostering new, unlikely connections. Creativity is all about bringing disparate ideas together in a new way, so don't feel guilty about your off time. Finally, have self-compassion at work. Not knowing how we'll get from A to B is part of the creative process, so starting to make a sound without knowing how you'll do it is perfectly natural. Don't beat yourself up about it, even though that's easier said than done. The next thing we can do to inject purpose into our work if we don't feel that it's already there is this. For example, my vocation is wildlife conservation, so I decided to ask the Wandering Band if we could weave in education about certain endangered birds. We have a tropics biome, which felt perfect for a character that was a honey creeper from Hawaii. Again, all our characters are birds, so everyone's a bird character in this. So these honey creepers in real life are going extinct at a rapid rate, so I wanted to encourage players to donate to a cause called Birds Not Mosquitoes to address this. The team said yes, so we're currently finding the best approach to add this without upsetting our current player base. If you also want to make a positive environmental impact, feel free to DM me after this talk. I made a list of resources specifically for composers, sound designers, and field recorders that make giving back easier. I'd be happy to share any other knowledge or advice that I have on this. We're going to start our last section with a couple suggestions from me And we'll finish it off with some killer advice from generous industry veterans. When scoping the game, I recommend establishing audio pillars with your team. As mentioned a bit earlier, these core tenets of how you design sounds will drive you to a specific style and will encourage cohesion. You make these pillars with core members of the studio, not just the audio team, so everyone's on the same page. Our pillars for the game were cartoonish, bird-centric, tactile and informative, clean player sounds, and decrepit enemy sounds. I go into all of these audio pillars in my sound design breakdown I showed you earlier if you want to learn about them in greater detail. They are public in here, and they're also part of a resource list I'm going to share later to make it easy to look anything I've been talking about up. Game audio mixing by Alex Riviere taught me everything I know about mixing. He suggests creating mixing pillars, which essentially are a flowchart that shows you what categories of sounds you prioritize in different game states. It dictates your bus structure based on the categories you chose and what standards you're going to export each category at so they enter the project pre-mixed. This saves a ton of time and makes everything more cohesive. It can be done when you're scoping, and it helps you establish what audio systems you'll need later on, so I highly recommend this and highly recommend reading this book if you want to learn more. As best you can, flesh out parameters, snapshots, custom scripts, and buses for mixing early on since your programmer will get swamped later. Having good naming conventions for folders, files, and the fmod project can save you a lot of time and prevent you from backtracking. This is what my buses and snapshots looked like in fmod, along with matching folder structure in fmod and on my desktop. Well, thank you for the compliments, everyone. That's really sweet. I like seeing that. Okay, so we are on to our big hitters. Several audio directors and senior sound designers in AAA were kind enough to share their insights on how to make the end of game development easier. The Sound Lab team, first and foremost, advises us to over-prepare at the beginning. This is because the request that the sound team has enough time to tie up loose ends and add polish might not be granted at the end, even if they have the best of intentions. They suggest testing and setting up detailed, organized projects and mixed structures early, then abiding by your rules later. For your mix, decide on standard target levels for categories of sounds to mix on the go, and finally, anticipate what the game needs early. Build solutions you can pull from later, whether it's for sounds, real-time parameter controls, systems, or all of the above. Debbie also mentioned that you might not get a certain sound list or certain feature request, which is why scoping and trying to predict as best you can what might be needed can really help you out in the end. So really interestingly, all of SoundLab Keyword Studio's advice mirror the other advice I got when I was consulting other people. So you're going to see some of that here. Steve Lane, Aaron Brown, and Rayson Berner all suggested incrementally mixing with access standards to keep the mix in a decent state throughout development. That way you're just polishing at the end, as Aaron puts it. Steve Lane adds to learn what doesn't work in the mix so you can recalibrate and get to multiple people on the team to listen to your work. This is especially if the mix is not working and you want another set of ears to try to be able to discern what's going wrong. Aaron Brown, Rayson Berner, and Alex Previty also suggested prioritizing and scoping properly to have the right amount of time, number of team members, and polish on your sounds. Alex Previty, a senior sound designer at PlayStation who worked on God of War Ragnarok, went on to add that it's better to have more tools than you need than too few. He also recommended much more, including 1, have a way to easily revisit the core pillars you've made and reference them in your work. 2, get hooks/parameters set up ASAP so you have time to test them out and modify them. 3, set expectations of what needs to be readily accessible in your project. And 4, make sure the middleware project is deliberately structured and organized. Finally, multiple audio directors, including him, warn not to submit temp work or cut corners since it will slow you down later. As Rayson puts it, you should always consider your first pass to be as close to shipping quality as you can make it. Treating your tasks as throwaway or temp work inherently drops our focus and care. That can make it a breeding ground for bad habits and cultures for an entire team. As always, keep it balanced to the context at hand of any given task, but resist this headspace even when others call it temp. We're not being realistic, consuming will be given time to return and finalize it later. But if you put something high quality in, you may legitimately not need to return. We should never be slaves to our rules or ideals, but there are many reasons to place weight on hitting this one, since it's often achievable. All right, we are nearing the end of the talk, so I'm going to take some questions and see if I was listening when Lewis taught me the Q&A feature. I also have a QR code in the corner, which is a list of resources and citations from today that you're welcome to check out. Basically, anything I pulled from, whether it's a book, a video, a game, I tried to make as exhaustive of a list as possible so that you can just continue learning on your own time if you're curious about anything that I mentioned. I'm also happy to send a PDF of this presentation to anyone, and we'll end up putting that in the resource list a bit later. All right. Let me see if any questions came in. Oh, no questions. Okay. That's all right. I'll give y'all a minute if you want to ask anything. You can just ask it in the chat here too, since there's no backlog. Whatever's easier for you. Oh, no problem. Your PMI. What's a PMI? I'm not sure. How long did it take to prepare this presentation? It took me a month. Yeah, a month of rewrites and practice, and also consulting people. It kind of trickled in. You know, Rayson was able to answer, and then Debbie from SoundLab was able to answer and ask everyone from SoundLab. So I ended up rewriting this presentation a little bit each time I got great advice from the folks I was consulting, because it helped me reframe what maybe was most important to cover. Oh, thank you, Avishai. I appreciate it. Which hurdle are you most proud of overcoming in the last 20% of development of Airborne Empire? Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I was most proud of changing kind of the paradigm in which I worked. So instead of thinking this has to be all organic, recorded material the way I used to do it, the way you see it in social media and things like that, I ended up bringing back synths into my work, especially for some of the new mechanical sounds, and decided it doesn't have to be this one way anymore. It worked really well for the sounds at the beginning, such as the building sounds and going out and recording for bird ambiances, but it didn't make as much sense for these mechanical whooshes and things like that. It wasn't like a bamboo stick or anything was going to be enough for those kind of slowed down whooshes. White noise ended up making more sense. So I think stopping restricting myself from doing things a certain way was really helpful, and also figuring out there's so much more to learn. I think there was a plateau where I thought, oh, I get FMOD now. I learned it on the job, but I understand it. And then I realized, no, there's this big curve up there of what I still need to learn. So realizing, no, I'm definitely still a student, even if I'm this late in development, especially as a solo sound designer and audio implementer where there's no guide to kind of look up at and teach me when I'm doing things wrong. Good question, Alec. Thank you. Project Management Institute. Okay, that makes sense. I have a business minor and an old career in like sales, project management, and marketing, so it could be little trickles of that throughout the project you're picking up on too. Oh, thank you, Joy. That's very kind of you. Oh no, Greg, where'd you go? I have done that so many times. I use Notion to send my email body and then I put it in emails because of how often I do that. Birds does a lot. I like it. It could be a noun, it could be a verb, like going birding. There's many options. Is there anything you wish audio devs would do differently in order to make your job easier? Interesting. It's a tough one for me to answer just because the only other person I worked with on this was our composer, and it was a throw assets over the fence situation. But I think the more everyone on the team knows about implementation, the easier it's going to go. One thing that would happen sometimes is that suggestions would come in that were kind of from the film angle, the linear angle, that didn't work as well on the nonlinear side. And in that sense, I think it's a bit easier to communicate and talk back and forth and find a solution when you're both speaking the same language. Like as soon as I, started saying, oh, they can make that into a parameter, or we could use a transition region to kind of get over here, that would certainly make it easier. Aside from that, it is kind of hard to tell since I haven't been in many situations where there's a hierarchy for the audio team. Oh, thank you, Terry. Okay. For Greg, my question is, at one point in the project, did you know you'd be going for that style, / did it come from iteration and experimentation? So to a certain extent, I knew I wanted to include birds in all the morale sounds. And in most of the sounds, bird-centric was definitely, oh, thank you. Bird-centric was definitely one of the first audio pillars we came up with. Tactile informative was a close second, and a lot of the UI sounds are a combination of that. So when I was scoping the game in the first month, that did start to come up, but I wasn't exactly sure how it would go. The birds came first, but the drums and the instruments we were using came later. The first UI sound I made for the game that was an alert was this pirates incoming one that you heard. And there's 3 different ones based on if you have high morale, average morale, or low morale. And I made the first one with a bird whistle. And when I went to make the daytime and the nighttime ones, I thought, well, I better make sure there's a framework where at a glance, whatever an audio glance is, someone can understand this is also a notification that I'm hearing. So instruments seem to be a good signal of like, I am trying to tell you something, a UI notification as a player. So when enemies are defeated, there's also instruments playing. And sometimes it's a war horn, other times it's another bird whistle. And also it was just creative constraints. I just so happened to have a strange hand drum at my disposal. And I thought, oh, what if I dunk that a bird sound comes up? So there was some experimentation, but it also came from realizing, oh, to make this cohesive, I need to match the style of what I made before, not only bird-wise, but instrumentation-wise, cadence-wise. So thank you. Good question, Greg. Oh, I could not remove Spotlight, so it is going to stay there. Oh, there we go. All right. I'm checking other questions now. Let's see. Did you determine which sounds were a top priority, or were more departments part of that conversation? So that was a conversation between the systems programmer, the main person I reported to, the game designer, and me. It's a pretty small team. So the co-founders of the Wandering Band, we had one UI person, we had one game designer, and we had one systems programmer. So we all decided together what would be top priority, mainly because Fred, our systems programmer, was the one who would have to set up the hooks if it wasn't something I could do easily with an Fmod Studio emitter or things like that. So we all planned together, but sometimes we wouldn't see eye to eye, so sometimes it would get changed, or I tried to advocate more, saying I think players would really pick up on this. For example, morale sounds like the ones you heard were actually deemed low priority or, TBD at first. And I ended up saying, since your birds can leave and this just affects so much of gameplay, and there's no UI notification that really would fit if morale level changed, because it was just this tiny icon that would go, there's got to be another way they can continue to be reminded, because they really need to do something about it if it's low. So we would decide as a team, but sometimes I'd push a little extra if I disagreed, and if it was something kind of ancillary to like the main core loops and what we were focused on, those are kind of the ones I'd give up. And the ways we'd set it were in my asset list that I'd share, we would put, priority level like 1, 2, 3, so that we could always go back and see. I've actually got a template for my asset list, like a generic version in that resource list for the QR code if you want to check it out. Good question. Thank you. Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Joy. I wish there were more than the cardinal emoji and like that duck and ostrich. Not even ostrich. Peacock for bird emojis. There's so many more birds at our disposal that we could use. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, happy to answer any more. We have plenty of time. So don't fret if you only just thought of something like. Oh, okay. I usually find it difficult to get in that creative mindset of experimentation once I'm near the ending/mixing stage of a project. What do you do to help your creative juices to flow again? Oh, interesting. Let me think about that for a moment. Let's see. So the creative mindset part, I will usually have a pretty hard time finding if I am just like relegating my time to work. Usually if I go and I do something completely unrelated to audio and take a real break, if you have the luxury of doing that, whether it's a day or a weekend or a week, and coming back will help. So usually if it's something I've never seen or done before, like a completely, let's say there's these underground like tunnels in Seattle, and it was the old city and you could learn about them. Like doing a tour like that can sometimes just give you that little tendril, that disparate node that you can connect to what you're currently doing and go, oh, I see it now. Like I can see my mix, like this whole central like tunnel unit that I need to fix. I think this is especially helpful if there's like a problem you need to solve. Well, mixing and polishing, of course, is a problem if there's like something you're stuck on. I think taking a break, relaxing, doing something new can give you that eureka moment, because you're giving your brain time to basically consolidate all this information and add the new stuff you've learned that seems completely unrelated to that. There's an author and a producer called Rick Rubin who made a great book. It's also in the resource list. I don't mean to keep calling back to that, but he does what he calls unnecessary creation, which is just creating for its own sake. So you're just whittling, for example, or if you enjoy your recording, you're just going out and recording. And that can tend to stoke creativity because It's not under these constraints of work, of authority, of this certain box you have to put it in, which is kind of how our creativity gets squashed, especially as there's less and less room for error and ambiguity. So I would certainly highly recommend that. And if not that, I would say mix on maybe a different device, and maybe the lowest quality device you think a player would use if it's PC, and hear it from that perspective, or watch someone else play and see what they're picking up on, because it might be completely different from you since you know the ins and outs of the game by the end of that time developing it. The ultimate vibes guy. Yes, he is, Alec. Let's see. Okay. For Terry, how many different sound effects did you create for the game, as well as how many ambiences? Ambiences is going to be a bit harder to answer. Sound effects, it's at about 200. We are still at the tail end of development, so there's room for a couple more in there, but about 200. The reason ambiences is hard to answer is because we would change ambiences depending on day or night. So there's like the day-night version that has these different layers. And then in addition to that, there are certain villages on the ground that have structures that others don't, like a windmill or a river running through it, called hero buildings. So we would have a 2D bed for some of them, but then would also have this 3D sound that we kind of put in. So I'm not sure how many ambiences, but for base ones, quite a few. And for the city in the sky, it's a bunch of machine sounds that are 3D, because you have to be really close as a player to hear them, that make one. So that's what kind of makes it ambiguous. But for ground villages, at least 10 different versions. And then for the city is quite a few machine sounds, probably between 15 and 20. All right. Any other questions? Oh, no problem. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call it, but if you ever have a question, feel free to DM me. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram. You can find my website too. So we're just going to have one piece of closing remarks, and then I'll let you go. So the last 20% of a game may hold 80% of the value or the work, but we have 100% control over how we prep and react throughout development. With the right systems, team, and mindset, we can use this opportunity to make the best game we can in the best headspace we can. Thanks so much. No problem. All right, I'm going to end the stream. I hope you have a great rest of your night, guys. No problem, Alec. Hey. Oh, no problem. Yeah, happy to help. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Yep, see you tomorrow, Lewis. Same time. Same place and everything. All right, take care, y'all.